Welcome to Dryair's instructional videos. My name is Terry and I'm your course instructor. Welcome to part 2 of flow reverser maintenance and repair. So here we are at the GTS 300 and we turn the flow switch on. We notice our lights on the timer is starting to go. We have voltage, but we notice that the actuator is not actually turning. We've been watching it for some time now. So let's diagnose the problem and see what we can find out. The first thing that should be noted is that this actuator is actually rated for 90 seconds for full sweep. What that means is it turns awfully slow, and that from this point all the way over to its quarter turn would take approximately a minute and a half. Alright, so here we are at the operator's door of the GTS 300, and you can see that the reversing switch is off and we have no lights up on the reverser timer. I've tracked down the wires for the GTS 300 flow reverser. What we'll see is that the blue is hooked to the red, black to black, brown to white. By looking at the schematic on the door, we know that the red is a common. So this is where we'll hook a clamp to our multimeter onto. And even with the switch and everything off, we should at least find 25 volts or 24 volts AC on at least one of these other legs. Going to the white, we have some residual voltage, which is normal, but going to the black wire, we see that we definitely have our 26 volts AC. If I turn the flow reverser switch on, so now you see I turn the switch on, we've got lights coming onto our timer indicating that we've got power going there. And we check again, we'll notice that now on the white wire we've got our 26 volts, so therefore it's switched from one to the other. Alright, I've set up a demonstration here to show just how fast this here goes, so I shall turn it on now. So as I said before, it takes about 90 seconds to go its full 90-degree sweep, and you can just sort of make out that it's moving now, but it's still very, very slow. If I put my pen across, maybe you kind of see a little better. Getting close to the halfway point. So it's quite often mistaken for a slow-moving valve for one that's not working, and as you can obviously see that this one does turn, it just takes time. And there we go. The other thing to note is that if by just turning that flow reverser off, we'll engage this to go back the other way. We'll watch it go about halfway and then we'll stop. So by now you'll know that it is turning, and it will stop at its original point. In the GTS 300, flow reversal is acquired by the valve body turning 90 degrees. Okay, we'll take this baby apart now and we'll see what makes it tick. One thing to note here is that if you were to lift this dial indicator up, just so you see an orange band all the way, there's an indent and it will actually stop. That disengages the actuator and you'll be able to turn the valve by hand. So knowing that might help to figure out if you've got a sticky valve or if there's actually some blockage within the valve itself. That just comes off by pulling. You'll find a screw inside. And the actuator will come off. Now, here you need to take note. You'll see an indent within the valve stem. And if I just pull the valve stem off to take a look, I've highlighted it here with black marker, but it is the only side that is got that indent all the way through. In this case here, it was facing this direction, which would be 45 degrees from the acting plane of the valve, and we'll see why shortly. You just give this a little pry and this will come off. Now in here we have our locking key, and inside here we have our tabs that will actually fit into all of these here in order to keep the locking key in place. To get the locking key out, we just give our valve body a little bit of a turn, pull up here gently, and there's our key. This will all come apart and allow you to inspect the O-rings. Now this is a new valve body, so I'm fairly confident that these rings are in good shape. You'll notice on the bottom here, this is heart-shaped, and it's specific to fit within this valve body, valve in here. And again, I've pre-marked in here, but you'll see that the top of the heart, the little indentation, is in line with the same as what our valve stem was at. To take this valve out, there's this threaded in there. It happens to be the same thread as the valve stem that we took out earlier. You'll lift it out, and there's the valve itself, which comprises of just a divider. And what the divider's job is that when it's going in this direction, that means the supply line has to follow through here into the valve, out the back, and through the bottom. And when this rotates the 90 degrees, then supply can just come around into the valve body and out to the top. Therefore, by reversing the flow, the direction of the flow. We can expect this for any damages, any nicks. Again, this is a new valve. I suspect nothing wrong, but we'll take a look for blockages. We see none, and we'll proceed to put it back together. Undo the screw now, a little easier. And you'll put it back in the same order. Again, noting the direction of that valve divider. Again, this will only go on one direction. A little bit of lubricant on there, water-soluble lubricant. Being cautious as to not to disturb the O-rings too terribly much, as it slips into place. this point our locking collar will go in. This locking collar, we can spin that however far we want, infinitely. But seeing that we just want it to lock, line it up like that. We'll put our cap back on. Now, there's also a notch on this secondary valve stem, and that lines up with the notch here as well. We want to make sure that those line up, and we'll, at that point, rotate it to that angle that we were talking about before. We can put our actuator back on. Put the screw in. Now it's very important that you have that valve stem lined up correctly before you put the actuator on. You'll notice as I was tightening it up, the valve turned. That's okay. And you'll also notice that the legs on the bottom of the duct are not equally spaced. It's the bottom leg that will fit here, and again I can't push it down, so we have that orange band, but if I rotate it, down it goes. In the GTS 600 and the GTS 900, they utilize a dual valve system, and by making the valves do their quarter turn, this is how we achieve the reversal of the flow. Alright, I've simulated what you would normally see in a GTS 600 or a GTS 900. And in default mode, the right hand valve would be pointing up and the left hand would be pointing down. If we were to power these up, this would swap this way and this one would swap upward. And in those scenarios, as it is right now, we have a straight throw through both of these valves. It will go straight through. The supply right now goes straight through and out this way, and the return would come straight up through the bottom and up there as the diagram had indicated before. If we were to give these a turn to actuate them so that they're in the rotated mode, the bottom here gets cut off. So now the supply has to come in, out this here, around, and out down this way. And the return would come up, get blocked at the valve, go this way, and because this one's open, now would come up and out this way. And that's how the orientation of the valves make this all work the way it's supposed to. So without further ado, let's get inside one of these valve bodies and see the differences. We'll start by pulling the dial off. The same setup with a single screw to hold the actuator in place. Now in this case, the valve stem still has that notch in it, but by default, it is placed evenly across the axes of the T-section. Similarly with this one, if we take it apart, we see the same notch, and they're actually pointed towards each other. So now we'll take that off. We'll pry off one of these, and it's the same tab into a lock key. We'll give the lock key a bit of a turn. Pull our valve assembly out. Our lock key, set that aside. This is very similar to what we had noticed before. Pair of O-rings in here to inspect. Again, this is a brand new valve body, so I don't anticipate too much problems. The same on the inside, is being heart-shaped with the divot, a very sharp divot on one side. That matches with that. Our same screw that we used before to hold the actuator in place. Now, this is where it gets different. There's an O-ring top and bottom on these, and instead of a divider, we have a pie. So in this case, what we have going on is that in this position, we shut off the T. And as this was to rotate downward, because this is the one that was normally up, it shuts off the bottom of this. So again, it directs between this cross pipe up, or it shuts the cross pipe off. Similarly, with this one, you'd see the same kind of a scenario. To put this back together, we'll inspect the O-rings, some water-soluble lube. This is new and it's still got lots of lube from the beginning, so. Some of these are just a little snug than others. You do want to make sure that that O-ring sits in properly. Reassemble this carefully. Same scenario where it'll rotate and rotate. Now in this case, we want it to point straight across out here. So we'll take our valve stem. It'll only go on one way, so don't force it. And line it up so it's straight across. We put our tab lock on. And we put our valve stem on, again noting that it is going straight across. Our actuator. Now this is where it gets tricky, because this actuator points down, and this actuator is supposed to point up, so that as it rotates, it takes that pie to the bottom. So this initially has to point up. So you want to make sure inside that it's lining up with the tabs inside. In this case, it's lined up this way as that bottom of the Y is pointing in the upward direction. And that one is finished. We never took this one apart, so it should be pretty straightforward to put back together. Now, as I was tightening, the valve had moved. I'll just turn that back and push that in. And we're done. This brings to an end part 2 of the flow reversing assembly. Come back again for part 3 and we'll take a look at the electrical side of things.